My name is David. For years, I believed that if a man builds enough, gives enough, endures enough, the walls around him will eventually call him family. I was wrong. The house in the suburbs of Austin stood on land I paid for. The mortgage was drafted in my name. The insurance policies bore my signature. The property taxes cleared from my accounts every year without delay. Even the irrigation system humming beneath the lawn answered to numbers only I knew. The family company, mine, registered under my name long before Ethan ever learned how to shave. I built it from a rented office that smelled like dust and ambition. I took loans when no one believed in me. I worked nights when Laura was already asleep. I missed birthdays in the early years so there would be money for the later ones. Brick by brick, contract by contract. I never demanded applause. Laura used to call me the Rock. She would say it softly, almost affectionately, when I came home late with ink-stained fingers and tired eyes. You're our rock, David. A rock doesn't complain. A rock absorbs weight. A rock stays. So I stayed. Ethan was 15 when I married his mother. Angry, sharp, quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. Mark had already established his pattern by then. Seasonal fatherhood. He arrived like summer storms. Loud, impressive, brief. Every few months, he would appear in Ethan's life with a new watch, a gaming console, sneakers that cost more than my first car payment. He would talk about real success, about connections, about how Ethan carried his blood. Then he would vanish again. I never competed. That was deliberate. I refused to turn the boy into a battleground. I paid the school tuition when Laura's savings ran dry. I covered orthodontics without mentioning the cost. When Ethan struggled in math, I hired a tutor and told him it was just part of the process, not a weakness. He never thanked me directly. Not really. Sometimes there was a nod. Sometimes a short, cool. I told myself teenagers don't articulate gratitude well. That was my first illusion. When he turned 16, I handed him the keys to a used but reliable sedan. Nothing flashy. Safe. Clean. Paid in full. Mark had promised him a sports car the month before. Mark didn't deliver. I did. Ethan stared at the car for a long time. He ran his hand along the hood. For a second, just a second, his expression softened. "Thanks," he muttered. I carried that word for years like a medal. College came next. Private university. Expensive. Out of state. Laura worried about the cost. I didn't hesitate. I transferred the funds before she could finish the sentence. "He's going to have opportunities we never did," I told her. Opportunity. That was my language. Stability. Structure. Long-term thinking. Mark sent congratulatory texts and posted a proud father message online. I wired the tuition. When Ethan wanted to study abroad for a semester, I paid for that too. Flights, housing, insurance, extra spending money so he wouldn't feel smaller than his peers. He posted photos from Europe, wine glasses, beaches, captions about living his best life. My name wasn't in any of them. I told myself that fathers don't need hashtags. After graduation, he came to me with a startup idea. Commerce. Something about custom athletic gear. The numbers didn't make sense, but his enthusiasm did. I wrote the check. Enough to launch. Enough to fail safely. "You believe in me?" he asked. "I believe in responsibility," I answered. "Make it work." He hugged Laura. He shook my hand. I accepted that difference. Over time, I convinced myself that respect was growing in quiet increments. He didn't mock me. He didn't rebel openly. He accepted the help. He lived comfortably under the stability I created. I mistook dependence for appreciation. That was my second illusion. The anniversary approached slowly. 20 years of marriage. Laura wanted something grand. A downtown restaurant. Private room. Close friends. Even Mark was invited. "For Ethan's sake," she said. I agreed. I paid for the venue without discussion. I upgraded the wine package. I arranged for a photographer. I handled the logistics because that's what I always did. Make sure nothing collapsed. The night before the dinner, Ethan found me in my office. He leaned against the doorframe like he used to when he was younger. "Dad," he said. That word again. Rare. Calculated. I looked up immediately. "Yeah." He shifted uncomfortably. "Tomorrow, during dinner. If I say something unexpected, just don't react. Okay? Stay quiet." I smiled. I genuinely smiled. "You planning to roast us?" He laughed lightly. "Something like that. Just trust me." Trust. I had financed his education, his transportation, his first attempt at entrepreneurship, his lifestyle. Of course I trusted him. That was my third mistake. The restaurant glowed in amber light the next evening. Crystal glasses, polished cutlery, a low murmur of polite conversation. Laura looked radiant, confident, proud. She held my arm like we were a success story. Mark arrived late. Expensive blazer. That same effortless grin. He shook my hand too firmly, like a challenge disguised as courtesy. "Wouldn't miss it," he said. I nodded. Dinner flowed smoothly. Toasts from friends. Stories about our early struggles. Laughter. Applause. Then Ethan stood up. He looked composed. Prepared. He raised his glass. "To 20 years of love," he began. "Commitment. Family." He praised his mother first. Spoke about her strength. Her sacrifices. The room softened. Then he turned toward Mark. "And to the man who gave me my drive, my blood, my last name." Mark leaned back, satisfied. A ripple of approving murmurs moved through the room. Then Ethan's eyes found me. "And of course," he continued, "we can't forget the man who's always been there." A small pause. My chest tightened, but I kept my face neutral. "Our family's most consistent investor," he said. "The walking wallet." Laughter. Not shocked laughter. Comfortable laughter. I felt the air thin. He didn't stop. He tried hard. Really hard. But let's be honest, you can't replace the original. An imposter is still an imposter. More laughter. Louder. Someone clapped. I looked at Laura. She was smiling. Not horrified. Not offended. Smiling, as if it were edgy humor that shouldn't be taken too seriously. In that second, clarity cut through me like glass. This wasn't improvisation. The phrasing was too smooth. The timing too clean. Mark's relaxed posture told me he'd heard it before. Laura's lack of shock confirmed it. It had been discussed, rehearsed, approved. I sat in a room I paid for, surrounded by guests eating food I financed, listening to a speech crafted to reduce me to a utility, a wallet, an imposter. I felt something inside me recalibrate. Not rage, not humiliation, precision. I raised my glass. I nodded politely. I even smiled. And in that controlled silence, while they laughed and clinked glasses, I understood something fundamental. For years, I had funded a narrative in which I was never meant to belong. I wasn't the rock. I was the resource. And resources are replaceable. I didn't argue. I didn't leave. I let the evening finish exactly as planned. Because the real response would not happen at the table. It would happen afterward. Quietly, legally, deliberately. And once it began, there would be no applause. Only consequences. I did not make a scene. That was the part they miscalculated. They expected outrage. A slammed glass. A wounded speech about sacrifice. Something dramatic enough to dismiss later as ego. I gave them none of it. I raised my glass. I nodded once. I let the laughter settle. And while the room returned to polite conversation, something inside me went silent in a way it never had before. There is a moment when humiliation burns. And then there is a moment when it freezes. I froze. Not emotionally, structurally. I watched Ethan sit back down beside Mark, pleased with himself. I watched Laura squeeze his shoulder as if he had delivered a clever performance. I noticed how no one looked at me for longer than a second. They were relieved I wasn't reacting. Good. The dinner ended with applause and photographs. I smiled in every frame. 20 years of marriage captured in staged happiness. The imposter standing at the center of the image. On the drive home, Laura chattered about how bold Ethan had been, How people loved edgy humor now. How it showed confidence. I kept my hands steady on the wheel. "Did it bother you?" she asked eventually. I paused just long enough to seem thoughtful. "It was a joke," I said calmly. Relief flooded her face. Another mistake on her part. That night, while the house slept, I sat in my office. The room was dark except for the desk lamp. The same desk where I had signed contracts that built our comfort. The same desk where I had transferred tuition payments without ever mentioning the amount. I opened my laptop. No anger. No shaking hands. Just clarity. They had forgotten one crucial detail. The house was in my name. The majority share of the company was in my name. Ethan's wedding, scheduled next month, was funded entirely by me. They believed humiliation carried no cost. I decided to correct that misunderstanding. Move 1, the wedding. The venue deposit, canceled. The catering balance, withdrawn. The florist contract, terminated under Clause 4B. Every agreement had my signature. Every payment originated from my accounts. I sent brief, professional emails. Change of plans. Funding withdrawn effective immediately. No explanation. None required. By midnight, the wedding no longer had financial backing. I imagined Ethan waking up to emails he didn't expect. I felt nothing. Move 2, the house. At 12:47 a.m. I filled out the preliminary listing request with a high-end realtor I trusted. Property address. Square footage. Market estimate. I selected expedited sale. I did not consult Laura. Legally, I didn't need to. The house had been purchased before our anniversary trip years ago. Structured carefully, advised carefully. The paperwork was clean. Transparency, Laura had once insisted. Just to protect both of us. She had no idea how thorough I had been. Move 3, the message. At 1:32 a.m. I typed a short message to Mark. No greeting. He's yours. Enjoy. I stared at the sentence for several seconds. Then I pressed send. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't poetic. It was administrative. If blood was what mattered, let blood finance the consequences. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was conflicted. Because I was reorganizing. By morning, I had scheduled meetings with my attorney and financial advisor. Joint accounts would be separated. Assets transferred into a protected trust. Ownership structures reinforced. For years, I had carried the household like a silent investor. Now I would behave like one. Breakfast was ordinary. Ethan scrolled through his phone. Laura sipped coffee. Sunlight filtered through the windows I paid for. I watched them carefully. At 8:17 a.m., Ethan's expression changed. He sat upright. "What the hell?" Laura looked up. "What?" "My venue just emailed. Something about funding issues." I continued buttering my toast. He refreshed his screen. His face tightened. "Catering too." Laura frowned. "That's strange." I took a slow sip of coffee. Ethan stood up, agitation rising. "Dad, did you see this?" I met his eyes evenly. "Yes." A pause. "You canceled it?" he demanded. "Yes." Silence filled the kitchen. Laura's voice sharpened. "David, what is this?" I set my cup down carefully. "Yesterday, I learned something important," I said. "Apparently I'm not family. I'm a walking wallet. An imposter." Ethan's jaw clenched. "It was a joke." "No," I replied. "It was accurate. And I've decided to stop misrepresenting myself." Laura's face went pale. "You can't just cancel his wedding," she whispered. "I can," I said calmly. "Because I'm the one paying for it." Ethan's voice rose. "You're being dramatic." I looked at him without anger. "You're being dependent." That word landed harder than I expected. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. 2 hours later, the realtor called to confirm the listing appointment. Laura overheard. "You're selling the house?" she asked, disbelief cracking through her voice. "Yes." "You can't." "I can." Her breathing quickened. "This is our home." "It's my property," I corrected quietly. For the first time in years, I watched her struggle with information she had never needed to consider. Ownership, responsibility, consequence. Ethan tried calling Mark that afternoon. I heard the pacing in the hallway, the hushed urgency. At one point, he said loudly, "He cut everything. Good. Let the original step forward." By evening, I had met with my attorney. Joint accounts closed. Shared credit lines separated. Primary assets transferred. Laura would receive what she was legally entitled to, not what she assumed. I returned home to tension thick enough to taste. Ethan stood in the living room. "You're ruining everything," he said. "No," I answered. "I'm clarifying everything." He took a step toward me. "You're doing this because you're embarrassed." I shook my head. "I'm doing this because I finally listened." Laura entered the room holding a folder of documents. "I have rights," she said, voice trembling. I almost smiled. "I know exactly what you have." What she didn't know was that a year earlier, at her insistence for updated transparency, we had revised our prenuptial agreement. It stated clearly, assets acquired through my independent capital remained exclusively mine. The house, the company, the investments. Transparent. Signed. Witnessed. I watched realization dawn across her face as she flipped through pages she had never truly read. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't the rock. I was the architect, and architects can dismantle what they built. That night, the house felt different. Not hostile, uncertain. They moved quietly, conversations muted. The laughter from the restaurant felt like it had happened in another lifetime. I stood in my office, looking at the walls. For years, I believed endurance proved love. Now I understood something simpler. Endurance without respect is self-erasure. I wasn't angry. I was finished. And once a man reaches that point, he does not shout. He signs. He transfers. He closes accounts. He sends short messages. And he waits. A week later, Ethan moved in with Mark. He didn't announce it like a defeat. He packaged it as independence. There were posts on social media the first night. Photos of boxes in the back of Mark's SUV. A caption about new beginnings. A filtered image of the two of them at a bar. Whiskey glasses raised. Father and son united. The performance continued for 3 days. On the fourth, silence. Because reality does not photograph well. Mark's house was smaller, older, mortgage overdue. The kitchen appliances mismatched. There was no backyard pool, no security system, no quiet stability humming beneath the walls. There was noise, arguments, budget discussions, numbers that did not bend. Ethan had lived inside insulation his entire adult life. Now he was exposed to raw arithmetic. I heard about it indirectly. Mutual acquaintances, subtle updates. The wedding venue officially released the date. The caterer posted availability again. The florist refunded part of the deposit to me. 2 weeks after the anniversary dinner, the wedding was postponed. Not publicly canceled. Postponed. The word people use when pride won't allow accuracy. His fiancée called Laura in tears. There were complications. Financial misalignment. Stress. Doubt. Love weakens quickly when security disappears. Mark, I was told, grew quieter. The cool dad energy faded when invoices arrived. When Ethan asked about tuition extensions. When the startup required another injection of capital that would never come. Being the original father is easy in speeches. It is expensive in practice. I did not step in. But the real shift happened much earlier. 2 hours after I sent that message to Mark. Laura walked into my office holding a folder. Her movements were precise, almost rehearsed. She placed the documents on my desk as if laying down evidence. "I've spoken to a lawyer," she said. "I'm entitled to half." Her voice trembled, but not with sadness, with expectation. For 20 years, she had never needed to understand ownership. She had lived inside the comfort of my structure. Now she believed she could leverage it. I leaned back in my chair. "Half of what?" I asked calmly. She opened the folder, sliding papers toward me. Property records, business valuations, retirement accounts. Our life, she said. I studied her face. For years, she had smiled at my stability, admired it, relied on it. Now she wanted to divide it. What she didn't know, what she had never bothered to examine closely, was the amendment we had signed the year before. Her idea. Just for transparency, she had said. A revised prenuptial agreement. Clean language. Clear boundaries. Assets acquired through my independent capital remained mine. Business equity protected. Real estate classified accordingly. She had signed without reading deeply. Trust, she had called it. I turned the pages slowly, letting silence stretch. Then I rotated the document toward her and tapped the highlighted section. She read. Once. Twice. Her expression changed gradually. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something heavier. This can't, she started. It can, I replied. Her hands trembled slightly against the paper. You planned this. No, I said evenly. I prepared. Preparation is not cruelty. Preparation is survival. She sank into the chair opposite me, as if the weight of legal language had physical mass. You're dismantling everything, she whispered. No, I corrected. I'm correcting it. The house listing went live 3 days later. Professional photographs. Wide angles. Sunlight through windows. Immaculate family home in prime Austin suburb. The irony did not escape me. Showings were scheduled quickly. The market was strong. Stability sells. Laura walked through the rooms like a guest in a museum, touching walls, adjusting cushions, trying to preserve something that had already shifted beyond her control. I never thought you would go this far, she said one evening. I stood in the kitchen. Granite countertops, imported fixtures, everything chosen deliberately. I never thought I would be introduced as an imposter in a room I paid for. Silence followed. She had no argument for that. Ethan called once. Not to apologize. To negotiate. This doesn't have to be nuclear, he said over the phone. You're overreacting. I listened. You built everything around money, he continued. Now you're taking it away to prove a point. I responded quietly. No. I built everything around responsibility. You removed respect. The structure collapses without it. There was breathing on the other end. Then frustration. You're petty. Perhaps. But pettiness screams. I was precise. The call ended without resolution. The sale closed faster than expected. Above asking price. I signed the final documents with steady hands. Laura received what the agreement dictated. Fair. Legal. Defined. Nothing more. She attempted one last conversation before moving out. We can fix this, she said softly. Ethan will come around. He was embarrassed that night. He wanted attention. I looked at her carefully. And you? I asked. She hesitated. That hesitation answered everything. Respect is not lost in a single moment. It erodes slowly. The dinner was not the beginning. It was the unveiling. On my final night in the house, I walked through each empty room. Echoes where furniture once stood. Marks on the wall from framed photographs. The faint outline of family life. I felt no rage, no triumph, only clarity. For years I believed endurance proved loyalty. I believed silence was strength. But silence had allowed them to define me as utility. A wallet. An investor. An imposter. Now the definitions were rewritten. I wasn't withdrawing love. I was withdrawing access. There is a difference. 2 weeks later, I relocated to another state. Smaller home. Cleaner lines. No shared history in the walls. I reinvested. Reorganized. Rebuilt. Laura called once more after the wedding was officially canceled. Her voice sounded tired. Ethan understands now, she said. He didn't realize how much you were covering. Understanding born from loss. Too late. He tried to apologize, she added. Did he? I asked. Yes. I paused. Consequences don't reverse because someone discovers arithmetic. She began to cry quietly. I did not interrupt. After 20 years of being the rock, I had finally stepped aside. And without that support, everything shifted. The wedding dissolved. The business idea collapsed. Mark retreated again, unable to finance the myth of fatherhood. Laura faced independence for the first time in decades. And I slept peacefully. Because for the first time, I was not carrying anyone who despised the weight of my presence while relying on my strength. I had stood up once, walked away, signed where it mattered, and ended the performance. The wedding did not collapse in a single explosion. It dissolved, slowly, quietly, like sugar sinking into water until nothing solid remains. The venue released the date first. A polite email about failure to secure final payment. The caterer followed. Then the photographer. Each cancellation arrived like a measured verdict. Professional, neutral, final. Ethan tried to salvage it. He called me once more, not shouting this time, not arrogant, just strained. "You're making this bigger than it had to be," he said. "You could have just talked to me." I stood by the window of my new office in another state, watching unfamiliar traffic move in disciplined lines. "I did talk to you," I replied. "For years. You just didn't listen." Silence. Then softer. "I didn't mean it like that. Meaning doesn't undo impact." "I believe you," I said. "But consequences don't wait for clarifications." He exhaled sharply. "You knew I couldn't fund it myself." "Yes," I answered. "That was the point." He didn't respond to that, because beneath the frustration he understood. For the first time in his life, the infrastructure he depended on was not automatic. Mark lasted exactly 18 days as the financial anchor. That's how long the Cool Dad performance survived under invoices and tuition deadlines. He called me on the 19th day. His tone was restrained, almost diplomatic. "This isn't helping anyone," he said. "You're punishing the kid." "I'm correcting the narrative," I replied. He sighed. "He made a joke." "No," I said evenly. "He made a declaration." Mark tried another angle. "You knew what you were signing up for marrying Laura." "Yes," I agreed. "But I didn't sign up to be ridiculed in public while financing the stage." He had no response to that, because he had been there, leaning back, smiling. The call ended without resolution. 2 weeks later, he stopped answering Ethan's requests for additional support. History repeating itself. Only this time, there was no silent backup system waiting to intervene. Laura attempted reconciliation 3 times. The first was emotional. "You're overcorrecting," she said during a video call. "You've always been steady. Why destroy everything over one night?" I studied her face on the screen. Tired, defensive, confused. "It wasn't one night," I told her. "It was 20 years of positioning." She shook her head. "That's dramatic." "No," I said. "It's structural." She didn't understand, because she had benefited from the structure without ever acknowledging its weight. The second attempt was strategic. "We can renegotiate," she offered. "Shared assets. A settlement beyond the prenup. Something fair." Fair. The word sounded different now. "I honored the agreement you asked for," I replied. "That's fair." She realized then that the legal path was closed. The third attempt was quiet. No arguments. No proposals. Just a simple sentence. "Do you miss us?" I paused before answering. "I miss who I thought we were." She lowered her eyes. That was the closest we came to honesty. Ethan's startup folded within 2 months. Without my supplemental capital, the margins were too thin. Inventory delayed. Marketing stalled. Investors hesitant once they realized he wasn't independently funded. Reality does not respect ambition without resources. His fiancée left shortly after. Not angrily, practically. She cited stability concerns, future uncertainty, emotional strain. I did not celebrate her departure, but I understood it. Love built on borrowed infrastructure rarely survives foreclosure. Months passed. The house sold. Funds transferred. Accounts stabilized. I built a smaller life cleaner. Deliberate. No one in my new neighborhood knew my history. No one measured me against a biological father who appeared in seasonal bursts of charisma. I worked. I slept. I invested. Peace, I discovered, is not loud. It is the absence of erosion. The apology came in winter. Not dramatic. Not desperate. Measured. Ethan asked to meet. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe halfway between our cities. He looked older. Not physically, structurally. You were right, he said finally. About what? I asked. I thought money was just there, like air. I didn't realize it had a source. I watched him carefully. And respect? I asked. He swallowed. I was angry at Mark for not being around. It was easier to diminish you than confront him. There it was. Not cruelty. Cowardice. You humiliated the wrong man, I said quietly. He nodded. I know. Silence settled between us. Not hostile this time, but sober. I'm not asking for everything back, he continued. I didn't understand the scale. Scale, yes. Because when you remove the decorations, the speeches, the appearances, the symbolic gestures, what remains is scale. Who carries what? Who funds what? Who stands where? I won't undo what I did, I told him. Consequences teach better than comfort. He accepted that. We parted without anger, without reconciliation, just awareness. Laura wrote me a letter months later. Handwritten. She admitted she had mistaken stability for permanence. She confessed she had underestimated how much silence costs a man over time. She ended with a question. Was there a version of this where you stayed? I read that line several times. Perhaps, if the joke had been interrupted. If she had stood up in that restaurant and said, "That's not funny." If someone had drawn a boundary before I did. But none of that happened. So I did. Now, when I think back to that dinner, I don't feel rage. I feel clarity. The moment Ethan called me a walking wallet was not the destruction of my family. It was the revelation of its architecture. I was never the father in their narrative. I was the funding. And once I stopped funding, the narrative collapsed. The wedding vanished. The startup failed. Mark retreated. Laura confronted independence. Ethan learned arithmetic. And I learned something far more valuable. Endurance without dignity is self-betrayal. I stood up once. I walked away once. I changed the entire trajectory of our lives with signatures, not shouting. So tell me, when respect disappears, is loyalty still a virtue? Or is walking away the only honest answer left?